In this episode, we consider whether Americans need GLP-1 drugs in order to hack into their brains so they can eat less, specifically because the food industry has gotten so good at using food to hack into people's brains to make them eat more. Hello, welcome to the Call Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys, and joining me today is a man who, when he does pods, all he has is wild thoughts. Tunde Ogunlana. Tunde, are you ready to show the people why we the best?
Of course, man. Just not going to be too wild.
Hey, man, I was trying to pick you up, man, but it's all good.
I know, but I got to stop you from doing all that.
I appreciate
not too exciting. So
under promise, over deliver, man. You got
yes, that's the way to do it. Thanks for saving me.
All right.
Let's go.
Before we get started, if you enjoy the show, I ask that you subscribe and like the show on YouTube or your podcast platform. Doing so really helps the show out. We're recording on May 13th, 2025. And we recently saw an opinion piece in the New York Times from Dr. David Kessler, a former FDA commissioner with, FDA, Food and Drug Administration, United States. And this piece essentially made the case that the food industry has figured out how to use foods to kind of hack into people's brains to get them to eat more and more in the name of maximizing profit. And for many people, the new anti-obesity medications known as GLP-1s may be needed to give them a fighting chance against the food industry and this brain hackery that's happening by the way that they operate on the brain to kind of reduce the addiction type of signals. Now, so Tunde, do you buy this framing from Dr. Kessler that we kind of need GLP-1 drugs, to even up the fight, so to speak, against the food industry in the United States?
Yeah, man, that's a great question. I would say this: the idea of needing it, like a need versus a want. I don't know. We could probably at 30,000 feet go through the definition of what need means, but I would say this: in coming into this article and looking at the topic, and when you brought it to me as, this thing about processed food, I was actually more negative going into it about what I would think about it, because I thought it was going to be the guys trying to be a shill and hack for that processed foods aren't that bad. So reading the article was enlightening and was good. And I did something pretty amazing, James, for an American.
You mean you read more than the headline?
Yeah, I read more than the headline, and it actually got me to change my mind about how.
Oh wow, those two amazing things.
Yeah, that almost,
or at least I would say extraordinary.
Yeah. After I recovered from my brain almost exploding for having done that. Here's the reason, and I want to pass it back to get some of your thoughts. I didn't realize the actual drugs cause people to eat less. So I thought, okay, well, obviously, if you're eating less of everything, means you're probably taking in less processed food. So there's probably a benefit there. And then he said something very interesting about his own experience with a drug. He didn't name which of these GLP-1s that he took, but he said that his experience after using this thing, I think he said for like 17 months, it helped him reset his appetite. And I thought that was an interesting way to look at the way we're all kind of wired and the way we're all influenced by our environment, and that the idea of being able to reset oneself and how they relate to certain things like food is very interesting. So that's why I would say, yeah, I found it to be an interesting way to approach the topic. Do I think that this will solve it for everybody? No, I don't. That's why I said the term need. Do we need these? I think that's part of the discussion we'll get into. But yeah, I found it very interesting and enlightening, and it did change my mind.
Yeah. I mean, well, one of the things he said that was really interesting to me is that that the GLP-1 drugs have conclusively shown that in many cases, obesity is not due to a lack of willpower. And so that's been kind of, our whole lives, really, we've seen this, this debate on, whether people are overweight because of lack of willpower or whether it's other stuff going on, whether it be genetics or whatever else is going on. And part of that discussion, though, a lot of times it's presented as an either or. And I don't think for the purposes of this discussion, you really need to get into it. But what was missing a lot of times, at least if you go back a few decades, was the idea, well, maybe the things that we're doing are setting us down this path, and then our bodies are taking over from there. So maybe it's not just genetics itself, but it's like, okay, maybe some people have a certain propensity or a tendency that once you go down a certain path, then it's harder to stop. In the same way that, for example, some people can have a drink of alcohol every day or every weekend and not have an issue. And other people start doing that and they become alcoholics. And it's not, there seems to be something more going on than just this person is a little more measured than the other person. Like some people seem to be more susceptible to certain signals. And the idea that the food industry, so to speak, has, and he uses terms like ultra processed and ultra formulated. And also we've referenced this in previous shows, how there is actual like the food industry using people that measure brain activity when you eat certain things or when certain flavors hit and where it hits and stuff like that. And so that there's all of this fine tuning being done to the quote unquote foods. Really, it's the stuff that we're eating, or in many cases that's being eaten, that is actually getting in and influencing the signals that your brain is sending. Things like food noise or something like that. Like that's what we usually talk about with, we've heard this term food noise people talk about. And they're like, oh yeah, I have, when I'm not eating, I have this food noise. I'm thinking about food all the time. That's how people talk about like heroin, like, so I think that's the connection really that is really being made here, is that, well, if the food we're eating is changing for some people more than others. And that's the other piece that we have to account for here. For some people more than others, if the food we're eating or that's made widely available to us can change us in ways to make us overeat, which, is good for the bottom line of a food company, but bad for society, bad for the individual and all this other stuff, then, and these drugs can, in the same way, these drugs have been shown to help people with addiction from drugs too. These GLP-1 drugs, or addiction from alcohol. Like people are like, yeah, I drink less alcohol when I'm doing these things. And I'm like, wow, there seems to be all kind of something swimming in the same pot here, something swimming in the same stew, where these things reduce some of these more addictive impulses and signals that are happening in people's brains, and food being a primary one of these that's being affected in this case. So to me, I don't know that the question of whether we need it is, like you said, that gets into questions on what exactly do you mean by need. But it definitely does seem to be something that kind of evens up the fight that many people didn't know they were having with the food industry. And I think that may be the bigger issue. The bigger discovery here may be the realization that we're having a battle with the food industry right now, where they're trying to maximize how much money they make. And the way they do it is by getting people to overeat.
Yeah. Well, and I think so there's a couple things to break down there, because you're right about, like, to me, it's interesting that this drug is able to help people not eat as much. And so that's what I thought about, that think about it. If I'm less hungry, obviously you're going to lose weight if you don't consume as many calories, just kind of the math equation of pluses and minuses. But if, let's say, I eat less, but I'm still only eating processed foods, right? It's not necessarily that much better for me than if I
but that's
eat less.
Part of the research, though, has been shown that people desire less processed foods also, like, again, without wanting that. But that's just one of the results is that they want wholer foods and less processed foods.
No, but that could be part of the resetting the brain. What I'm saying, though, is because part of what I realize when I say the word need, which again, we are saying that is that's the thing that's interesting to define. It's also the need of having more abundance of those choices, like you're saying, so that if people do want to eat less processed food and their brain is actually craving more whole foods and natural stuff like leafy greens and all that we also have an opportunity to get them, and that they're abundant. You know what I mean? And I'm just thinking about things like most people go to work somewhere and maybe the choices in the office building cafeteria or whatever just aren't that healthy. So I think part of it is it's the environment plus, like you said, the food, because
the choices that we have are always going to limit us. And I think that's kind of like whether the short-term fight with the food industry, that where some people, again, are going to be more susceptible to these kind of the food hitting their reward center and like a drug, in the same way that some people, like can try a drug and be like, oh yeah, that's cool. And then other people try it and it's like, I got to have it every day. They have quote unquote food noise about the drug, or drug noise, and they're walking around thinking about it all the time. And so in the same way though, when we're dealing with that, I wonder if this can be like, so short term, there might be this evens out the fight for many people. And they're like, oh, I can walk around without thinking about, this thing that has tapped into my brain all the time. And that makes me live healthier or whatever. Great. But in the long term, the kind of supply issue does matter. Like one of the other benefits now, processed foods, ultra processed, ultra formulated, all that. Yes, they are set up to hit our reward centers and everything like that, but they're also set up to be very shelf stable and to be very transportable and so forth, so that there's not as much like we try to ship around a bunch of leafy greens. That stuff goes bad really quickly, or fresh foods and stuff like that. Yeah, it's fresh, meaning it has to be eaten pretty quickly. And so you can't just have it sitting on a shelf for 3 months until somebody's ready for it. And so that creates a whole nother issue of demands that would be needed if we want to try to reformulate and have some food supplies that are better for us, because then it's like, okay, well, that's a lot of turnaround every day. And I'm not to say it's insurmountable or anything like that. I mean, people have been eating for a long time, and processed foods have only recently come around. But at the same time, it's something that if society demanded these more, there would be logistical issues, but also ideally there would be more of an incentive to provide it. And so that may reformulate kind of the incentives for the food industry. Yeah. But again, like the thing on whether we need it, the answer, and I'll move past this, but I just want to say the answer really does come down to, if we're going to allow our food industry to get away with kind of reprogramming our brains, then it's cool to at least have an arrow in our quiver as well, that we can say, okay, well, let's fight back against that. Because some people are able to just say, hey, I'm going to try to avoid this stuff. And they're able to successfully do that. But not everybody, like a parent, not everybody. And so let's not leave people behind just because they can't just say, I'm going to avoid this stuff. I'm not even going to go. I'm liable to get addicted. And so I'm not going to even have this in my house, or I'm going to try to avoid seeing this stuff. I'm going to try to avoid it altogether, not try to dabble in it or dabble at it. Just like some people who just don't do alcohol, like they won't drink alcohol because they're like, I don't want to take the chance of falling down that hill. I know I have a high susceptibility.
Well, that's exactly how I deal with 100 proof bourbon these days. We don't buy a bottle for the house. We get an old fashioned when I go to a restaurant or somewhere like a bar. I'll get something like that, but I don't get it for the house, because if I get it for the house, then it's going to be gone.
No, I'm the same way with like cherry pie. I can't have it in that. Like, I just won't have it in the house, and then I'm good. I don't think about it. But if I got it sitting there on the counter and I walk by it 3 or 4 times in a day.
Hold on. It's about proximity and exposure, right?
Yeah, well, seeing it a bunch. Seeing it, and then the proximity is both.
So I'm gonna share this video with my wife, because this will explain why I don't go to strip clubs. I know if I went once a week for a year, that's 52 times I could be drinking. It could be at least one of those 52 times I touch somebody or I mess up. But if I don't go at all, then, right, there's just no exposure, no proximity. There's no chance. So,
hey, well, maybe you could if you just had got a shot, got a GLP-1 shot. No. You'd be able to do it all you wanted.
No. I feel this conversation going in a direction that's going to get me in trouble. So I'm going to.
I'm going to
pivot back to where we were.
Yeah,
here,
exactly.
I want to say this. I want to say this because I want to respond to what you said. Because here's the thing: the GLP-1 to me is another example of we've built a society in the United States, and this isn't. I'm not here bashing our country. It's just kind of how we've evolved. You made a good point about food and the need for it to sit on a truck and to be in packaging and all that so it doesn't go bad. And that's because we decided in the early to middle 20th century that we were going to have a very centralized food distribution system in this country with big farms in the Midwest. And then they got to distribute it all over this large country that we have, and it got to sit on shelves. But when you go to Europe and other parts of the world, what happens is, because the countries are a lot smaller also, they don't have as much of a landmass and a huge population they got to feed. And they have farms all over the country. So you have much fresher food available in various parts of the country because you have the much smaller and independent farms sending food.
Well, it's not the just other thing is, plus the food, the producers are local as well. There's many more local producers, people who take the actual stuff from the farm and then create either, finished products or things like that. It's much more them, as opposed to some bread making place, just one for a state, and it sends it everywhere. You'll have them in a bunch of different communities.
Correct. And then on the flip side of that too, the way we built our communities as a country, again, I'm not bashing America. I'm saying we now have this infrastructure of massive suburbs. And most of us, we live in South Florida, unless you're in downtown Miami or downtown Fort Lauderdale, something like that. Other than that, there's no way to walk around because everything is these sprawling suburbs and you got to drive everywhere. So I'm not saying that we're bad for that and all that. What I'm saying is that we keep putting other things, and GLP is an example of, because we're not dealing with the the main issue, which is our infrastructure, our food infrastructure, all that stuff. And I recognize it will be very difficult to change those things right now. I'm not talking about that. I'm not saying I have an idea of how to reshape suburbs in the United States or deal with farming. I'm just saying that until we deal with those kind of things, because if human beings walk more and they eat healthy, a lot of these problems go away. And so it's just been proven.
But hold up. I mean, that's, okay. But that's kind of the point of this conversation, is that there's somebody who's working against your ability to eat healthy in that. And so
who's that?
The food industry is trying to prevent you from eating healthy, because you eating healthy is bad for
I just wanted to hear you say it for the audience. So.
Well, that's the thing that we've learned. There's an adversary here, and the question being to even for some people to even that fight up, to give them a fighting chance. These drugs come into play, but I agree with you. Like some of the issues is like, well, I agree with your overall point, but my thought is more so, well, we also have regulatory power in the terms of, as a democratic society, or a society that at least considers itself democratic to some degree. Like we can also say to food industry, say, hey, well, certain things you can and can't do. In the same way you've pointed out when you've traveled overseas and you're like, oh, wow, these things are made differently than the same version of when I go to this fast food place or whatever, I'll show up. It's actually a different sandwich than I get with what I would get in the United States. And that's all because of regulation. And that's because of what government body says, okay, hold up. This is a little too much, man. Like you're over here doing this to people. We're not going to let you go that far. And so there's also other ways to constrain how much our brains are allowed to be hacked by the food industry in the name of profit. But the other thing I wanted to look at with you on this is, and I do want to keep this moving because, we can go back and forth forever, but the idea of one other thing with the GLP-1s, though, is although there's been these things kind of the way they work have shown that there's a disconnect between this idea that it's just a lack of willpower, why some people may be overweight. And that you take this shot and then all of a sudden you got all this willpower. And it's like, well, hold up. Maybe it wasn't just the lack of willpower. Maybe there was something else. Again, your brain being hacked in a certain way. But the social stigma doesn't seem to have gone away, though, because we've seen in many instances, and I sent you a piece about this, where a lot of people are wanting to conceal their use. What do you think is still up with why we still have this social stigma with this, where it's like, well, people, like I sent you something where like a woman was concealing her use from her family, her family members and stuff. Like she's storing it outside. It's winter, so it's like, this is going to get hard in the summer.
Her husband thought she had a chronic illness, so that he would she was like really sick or something. That's why she was losing weight. So that's interesting.
So why do you think we still have this kind of social stigma? And again, not
that's
across
a good question.
Board, but it's really interesting that we have this thing. It's like, oh yeah, this thing is working great for people. Hey, this helping people, they're fighting against the food industry and all that. But, people don't want to say that they're taking it.
So I'll give an anecdotal story and then I'll give you my thoughts. So I have a friend. It's funny. This just happened over the weekend. My buddy came over. He'll remain unnamed because he's lost a lot of weight, probably about 75 pounds in the last year and a half, 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And he tells us that he's got a trainer. He's going to the gym, which I believe he's going to the gym. I don't think he's lying. But there's always a little bit of a change in the story. So like in the last week or two, it's keto, which is why he's losing weight. But my wife noticed something that was funny because this is the second time she noticed. That's why I say it was this weekend, it fresh in my head. It's the second time he come over, he's drinking like crazy, right? Wine and bourbon and shit with me. So I'm thinking like, dude, you ain't on keto if you drink it like that. And then when we order pizza for the kids or stuff, like he's over there chomping on everything. And so we noticed, I'm like, hold on, dude.
But that also could be because he's drinking like crazy.
But it's just like, I can tell because I've been around him enough that his lifestyle habits haven't changed in a way that someone who lost that kind of weight through keto are doing it. So it was just a joke. My wife and I were saying that. And then there was a time when somehow she brought up this whole thing with Ozempic face, and he kind of slipped. And we don't know what he's doing, but he kind of was like, yeah, I'm glad I don't have that.
Based on your anecdote, I understand the reason there's still the social stigma is because you're judging people.
So that's the thing. That's where I was going is that, yes, by looking at a friend who I suspect is doing it, who won't tell us, I do think that there is that stigma. It's kind of like cheating on a school test, right? Like people want to be
But
seen as smart.
why do you think that's kind of how some people feel that it is, like cheating?
I don't know. I think there's a couple things. I shouldn't say I don't know. The article actually brought up some things I wouldn't have thought about on my own. I actually, this is a bigger esoteric statement. I feel fortunate that I didn't grow up in a family that put me down and that criticized me a lot, because I don't know what that feels like, right? But I recognize reading some of the articles, and unfortunately, some of the people were saying that they have family members that would say stuff like, "Oh, well, you're not losing weight the right way if you're taking those," or would just criticize them. And so I get it. Like, that's not my experience, but I'm not going to judge somebody if they have been conditioned to hide certain things from people close to them because they're constantly feeling like they're judged. There's other people that, like you're saying, that the idea of lack of willpower, they might be in their own head that they think that other people won't look at them the same way if they admit it. So I really believe that it's an individual level. I don't have a blanket reason as to why people would have these kind of stigmas, but I do think they're, all emotional and psychological, like other stigmas that people want to hide.
I think we have to acknowledge that they are, whether correctly or incorrectly, picking up on signals from other people. And like when I remember when they're the low carb stuff or the no carb, keto or whatever, but when people go on low carb, people weren't ashamed to admit like, oh yeah, I'm trying to go low carb. I'm trying to do this and that. I'm trying to go keto. Like that would be something people would volunteer, that they're trying to manage weight by doing this type of stuff. And so it's not like people will always try to keep kind of on the low things that they're doing that involve trying to get to a better weight, and so forth. So I think we may think, oh, it's something about them, why they don't want to share. But I think it's more so something they're picking up in everyone else, that they feel like people would look at them a certain way or judge them a certain way in terms of if they admitted it like that. Now, this may change. We've seen celebrities and so forth get out there and talk about how they've done it, and that may change kind of the overall society. But I think this does come back to the idea of that these are moral failings, that being overweight is a moral failing, and that stigma, people still feel that. And the people who look at someone who's overweight, they still feel being looked at like they have a moral failing. And the reason is because I think that this is very similar to kind of I look at it similar to the drug thing. Like as much as we want to tell everybody in society that, drug addiction in many respects is like, people have susceptibility to it. Like, again, some people can take a drug on the weekend and it's all good. Other people take that drug and then they're addicted, they do it a couple times, and then just kind of the way their brain chemistry is and how it hits them. And we can tell people all they want, but we still, as a society, again, not myself personally, but as a society, when we see somebody who's addicted to drugs, we look at that person and say, oh yeah, that person doesn't have the willpower needed to be a strong, successful person. We look at it as a moral failing. I think that that's still in place here from that. And so people feel like they're sidestepping the moral failing by going to getting this pharmaceutical intervention. And I think it's just it's kind of a built-in societal structure that hasn't changed, at least enough to where people would openly talk about this. It doesn't involve them doing a lot of work, as is what it is basically. Like, instead of going low carb requires a lot of work. Going to the gym requires a lot of work. And so people can feel proud about that. Like, yeah, I'm putting in the work. But getting a shot doesn't require a lot of work. And so I think that in that case, people don't feel that same pride. And then they feel the judging eyes, so to speak, of their peers. And so they try to avoid it. And it's probably something that just over time may or may not change. But it's just very interesting, though, because you are doing something, like, and normally it's like, oh, yeah, you could be proud about doing something. But yeah, it between the people who are receiving the messages and the people who are sending the messages, there's definitely something there where it's something that on a societal level, so a lot of people tend to want to keep silent as far as that they're doing.
Yeah, I think it's actually a big combination of what you're saying, like several of those things all in one, and maybe with certain people, at least, there's a more dominant side of certain parts or another. And that's why I think it's a great analogy, the drugs and alcohol. That's why I thought of things like cheating on a test in school. It's all about, whatever someone's, how they see the outside world.
But the cheating thing is a little different, though, because that actually is dishonest. Like, That's like
Yeah, but some
objectively.
people, but that's what I mean.
like,
But James,
getting a
that's what I'm saying is
GLP-1
that.
shot isn't objectively dishonest.
But that's what I'm saying is that it's really, like you're saying, comes down to how the person feels they're going to be perceived. We have great examples now of people being very dishonest in public who are very well known and they don't care, right? Like they're okay with that. So for some people, they'll cheat on a test and be like, yeah, like they want to be known as that person that, yeah, I went around the system and I got it. Some people are like that. Other people aren't. And they'll hide that they didn't, like you're saying, put in the work to study and all that. Same with steroids, right? Some people don't want to put in the work to really lift weights and
well, see, but that's even a misconception, though, because steroids doesn't let you avoid putting in the work. It allows you to put in more work than your body normally would. So you actually still doing the work, but
people want to be
circumventing your normal.
Maybe the work is the wrong way to put it, but it's people because this could be like Botox or something. I know people that get plastic, like those little touch-ups and stuff, but they don't want to tell anyone. It's because they don't want to be seen as that they did some, like they want to be seen as they naturally got to this point. And that's why that was where the steroids.
I think that's probably the better example there.
And it's kind of like this stigma, like I don't want people to know and that's what I'm saying. It's their perception of others that I mean,
even in terms of like dyeing hair, we've seen people who get older and they'll deny that they dye their hair, and it's like, oh,
dudes will be 85 years old with jet black hair. And they're like, come on, man. They'll be like, nah, it's natural. Like, really? Didn't they, honestly, when we were kids, didn't they say that about Ronald Reagan?
Hey,
like
man,
he didn't dye his hair.
I'm not giving it to
I remember.
But yeah, I think a lot of these things we've seen this tendency to want to deny the intervention, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it generally does tend to relate to how much work you have to put in or don't have to put in. The more work you have to put in order to get there, or I guess sometimes it could be if it's natural too. If it's like, oh, this is my hair is always just like this. It's long and luxurious and yada yada yada. So I don't know, but I mean, it seems to be.
Look, as guys, James, I'm not gonna put you on there. I'm not even putting myself. I'm just gonna say it. One thing that men are sensitive of is many men don't want to admit that they take a pill to get it done in the bedroom, right?
There's another one. Yeah, that's another one.
It's an example. Guys don't want to be seen as deficient, but a lot of guys take it, right? Those pharmaceutical companies are making a lot of money. So for selling those pills. So that's what I'm saying, that it's a very unique, I think, as an individual level. But and I think you're right, James. Maybe if, like many other things, maybe if more celebrities and people who are trusted messengers of our kind of cultural society and all that come out and acknowledge that they've lost weight with this, maybe it'll take some of those stigmas off. But let's see.
It's something that it wouldn't just change overnight, but it may not change, because again, I think that's another example. The male enhancement stuff or whatever that stuff is very popular because the ads are everywhere, so it's like, but you don't see a bunch of people talking about, like, that's my thing, like that's the way I do it. But if they were running 2 miles or 3 miles a day, they'd be like, I run 3 miles a day. That keeps my blood flowing very, very good. So because there's a level of effort attached to that. Well,
I do a lot of stretching in my hip flexors and my hamstrings, got to keep all those pipes loose down there. So,
but no, I think we can wrap this topic from there. It's an interesting thing. I mean, kind of looking at our society though. So, but we appreciate everybody for joining us on this episode of Call Like I See It. Subscribe to the podcast, rate it, review it, tell us what you think, send it to a friend. Until next time, I'm James Keys.
I'm Tunde Ogunlana.
All right, and check out, we'll have a call out also this week, so check that out as well.